Hello, 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 ladies and gentlemen. You are watching, you are engaging with the Westcliffe Climb. I am here really with the intellectual counseling psychoanalysis Mount Rushmore, just two of the heads that would be on it. I really feel like I'm just kind of throwing, like, it's like intellectual batting practice for me. I got Hank Aaron and Lou Gehrig, and I'm just throwing them underhand for 30 minutes, and then we leave. Such an honor, of course, to be back here with Dr. Paul Looney. How are you, sir?
Doing great. Thanks, Josh. Glad to be here.
Love having you. Of course, a staple of our diet here of Westcliffe, and then of course, we have none other than, you may know him as Dr. Kozhi Mackay. I like to think of him as Dr. Guava. And if you don't know that reference, this would be a point of encouragement to go back to previous episodes. I don't know. Maybe the last time we had him on. I'm going to go ahead and just take a stab at it, like minute 9:48. I'm not saying I looked into it this morning, but Dr. Guava. Brother, how are you doing?
Glad to be here. Glad to be here with both of you. Because I need another name.
Well, let's get things going, because this was a strategic move, I have to admit, because there's a beautiful connection between Paul's video last week and your video that premiered this week. I'm gonna be honest, we're at a time where it's not a bad thing to get hit with truth right between the eyes. It's a beautiful thing. I watched your video on my phone, and I actually almost felt guilty even watching it on my phone. That's how powerful your video was. So so I have to ask you, first question out of the gate, your heart, your goal, your intent, where were you coming from there? It was awesome. So well done.
Well, I appreciate that. I love technology. And so I think whenever I bring up that topic, there's a sense that I don't like technology, but I do. I'm on technology right now. We have a camera up there. We have another camera right over here. I mean, I love technology. Technology is fantastic, but it's only fantastic if it's in the right hands. It's a wonderful tool, but it's a terrible master. And so I think we've spent so many years blaming the tools for everything that goes on or everything that goes wrong. But we don't really look at the individuals making those decisions and those choices, because we do have decisions and choices to make when it comes to which technologies we use and then when we use them. This is a wonderful tool for me to keep up with my wife, to see what's going on with her, what the latest is when I'm traveling and so on. But it's terrible for me to be on that same technology when I'm face to face with her, because then I'm not really engaging with her. I'm engaging a portion of myself with her, and then I'm engaging with others. And it's the same thing in any other area of your life, right? The technology is great, but you could have the Bible app open on your phone sitting in church, and then you've got your notifications turned on. So now you're getting other information coming through. There's no way for us to not be distracted by that. Wow. So it's, we have the tools available to us. You can hit do not disturb, and then there are no notifications, and you can only focus in on the Bible app. But it takes a couple of things. One of those things is discipline, and the other is courage. And the word courage comes from the French coeur, which is your heart. You have to throw your heart into it. You have to make that decision that says, this moment is so important. I need to be engaged in this moment with this group of people for this set amount of time. And then I'll turn around and go back to something else later. And so for me, it's really practicing the power of full engagement.
I love it. Okay, I'm gonna kick this over in just a moment to Dr. Paul. But before we do, I meant to ask you this. Was there some moment that you can describe, or has this been a value that you have held so close to your heart and your mind for as long as you can remember? Is that always been innate within you, and this is how you've put these practices in place? Or was there some kind of moment in your life where you went, you know what, from now on, this is the ball game?
I think for me, it was a combination. I'm young enough and old enough to remember phones not having screens like we have them now.
Yeah.
I didn't text I didn't do the T9 texting ever. Because in my mind, it took way too much time to pick up the phone and talk to somebody instead of doing that. So I didn't start texting until we had a QWERTY keyboard. But for me, I saw what it did to other people where they were not engaged. I got to experience being in meetings and people were maybe not deliberately, but they were pretending to engage with me, but they were engaging with everyone but me, right? Because there's a sense of people feeling really self-important whenever you've got multiple things going on, right? Excuse me a second, I have to take this. It sounds really self-important. I'm like, look, the president is not on the phone trying to talk to you. You need to calm down and take it easy. But that's what we do, and so for me, I think the big transition for me is kind of a funny story. So my sister Barbara, my oldest sister, she lives in London. She's 6 hours ahead of me. All my siblings are ahead of me. So when they're saying good morning for the first time, I'm saying good night, which is so fun. And anyhow, so I used to keep my phone on. The ringer used to be on with this idea that I might be needed, right? Something may go wrong or go on with a niece, a nephew, brother or sister, or parents. And my siblings needed to get in touch with me. So let's play this scenario out very quickly. If I get called at midnight to let me know something specifically has happened, it's going to take me 8 hours, maybe even 6, before I can actually get on a flight if it was that serious. And so when my phone, excuse me, would still buzz and calls would come in and none of them were important, it kind of hit me at that point. Why keep my ringer on? I can't remember the last time my actual ringer was on and I missed something important, because most of our daily interactions, they're like Post-it notes. I'll get to it when I get to it. And when I get to it, I'll take care of it. Because if somebody sends me a text, it's clearly not urgent. If they call me and it's urgent, we can probably figure that out and get that done. But the vast majority of things in our day-to-day experience, I think there's a sense of us feeling as if we have to have more control than we really can have control. And the truth is, there's nothing I can do. I always tell my wife, something goes wrong, don't call me, call 911. I can't help you. And that's the truth, right? Now, I need to be informed. That's one thing. And I'll check my phone when I'm done. But right now, this moment belongs to our listeners. It belongs to our viewers. It would be unfair for me to take this moment of people who've dedicated this time to be engaged with us, to then take a portion of my engagement and to take a portion of my focus and put it on other things and other people. That's not fair. So I think for me, those are my 2 turning points, is recognizing that most of everything is not an emergency. And even if it was, I can't really do much about that. And I have to take control of the technology. Otherwise, the technology would take control of me.
Wow. Okay. So then just to piggyback on that. All right, Paul, how would you explain the dynamic of walking into a restaurant? There's 4 people seated at the restaurant and all 4 are on their phone with someone else other than the other people that are seated at the table at the actual restaurant. What's going on there?
Well, first of all, it's a tragedy that you see all the time, that people have lost the ability to have some downtime where they're not entertained or engaged in some activity that consumes them. And so the temptation, when there's a lull in the conversation, when you're sitting with your parents, if you're a teenager, or with your teenager, if you're a parent, the temptation is to fill in that space with something that distracts me from the lack of connection. I have to say, I was very convicted by Kozhi, by your video, and Josh, by yours this week. You busted my chops. It was like, ow, like, ow, because Kozhi in particular, I think, well, both of them for different reasons, but the challenge that you issued to have a rule in life about phones face down, phones go to bed before people do, just like things that that we make as rules to support us in engaging life fully. As I'm listening to you today, Kozhi, what occurred to me is that you're suggesting that we, by feeling self-important and powerful, we actually surrender our true power to make a difference. That feeling like, oh, I can't miss this call or this text makes me feel important. But the real importance I have is being fully present and engaged, because people are starved for that sense of value. And I think the video really captured that for me. And again, it challenged me to be more present and to be more rigorous in the way that I relate to my world, and especially to devices.
Well, so then to connect Paul's video to Kozhi's, because Paul, just last week you were talking about being fully present, and you're already kind of making that connection now. What would you guys say? And Paul, you go ahead and lean off. Like, what is the connection that you maybe saw between your video last week and what Kozhi just put out? It seems like there would be a beautiful connection there.
Yeah, I think there is. One of the things that came out of your video, Dr. Mackay, was how disruptive our interruptions are, that it takes time to get back to the present, to get back to being in the moment when you're taken off somewhere else. And I think that for me, that's the big connection for me, was thinking how being present depends on not just an instant, but on a focused period. If I meet with someone for counseling or therapy, or if I sit down to have a conversation with my wife, any interruption in that discrete amount of time takes me away from being fully present. And that's where, for me, I'm so challenged by that, because there are times I have to confess, even in my work with people or having a luncheon with someone, I will give myself permission to look at the phone, and it's really encouraged me. And I think that courage is, it's in encouragement too. But I think, Kozhi, you've encouraged me to take that courageous move to be more disciplined, more rigorous, and to follow your rule.
I appreciate that. I think for me, it's when we talk about presence, if you've ever spent time with young children, when you don't pay attention to them, right, especially when your face is turned away from them, I love the fact that they will grab your face and they will turn it, because to them, you making eye contact is really paying attention to them. And the truth is, I say that we are all big kids. Most of us inside are just yearning and would love to grab someone by the face and turn them so that they can look at us. We probably shouldn't do that because it's creepy, and so many other reasons. But deep inside, that's how we feel, is that we want someone to really pay attention to us. We don't expect them to pay attention to us all day, all the time, right? Because to some degree, we are old enough and mature enough that we recognize that's not going to happen. But for the set amount of time that we have together, right, it's a very, very specific amount of time. It's a discrete amount of time, as Dr. Paul said. That time and that moment belongs to us. Other people shouldn't be in this moment. And I thrive in those interpersonal moments where it's one-on-one time, or 1, 2, 3, where you can engage. And human beings have engaged for thousands of years without cell phones. And they were much more productive back then than we are now, right? We've got all these fancy technologies now. But when you think about some of the best things that have been created that have lasted long, whether it's philosophies, whether it's mindsets, whether it's actual buildings and so on, you have to go backward. And it takes a great deal of focus. In my world, there's only one type of focus, and it's laser. It has to be laser focused. Right now, you and I, or the three of us, we're engaged in this moment. When we're done with this moment, we can roll over to the next moment. But we can't intermingle these moments, especially when we've got more things trying to distract us. I think that number is about 15 minutes. It takes about 15 minutes for us to come back to where we were when we've been distracted. And the challenge also is that our brains, we already have a problem with the way the brain works. So all of us have to do the work. I think the average person speaks at a rate of about 125 words per minute, but the average brain can process between 600 and 800 words per minute. we already have a problem right there, because for the vast majority of us, we're speaking way too slow for our brains. So I'm already distracted as it is. I don't need an extra distraction making my life hard and making it difficult for me to have honest, genuine, and very open dialogue and conversations and connections with people. So I need to remove as many distractions as possible.
So then just to add on that, because I have the inside track on you, the thought I had was literally laser focused, which then you literally said the line. How has that changed, having this kind of focus that you have, being in the moment, focused on the moment? What has it done for even your productivity? Because I would think a lot of people would think, well, if I got the cell phone going, I got the computer going, I got all this happening, I'm taking these calls, look how busy I am, I'm busy, I'm productive. But I'm assuming you take a little bit different approach. And what do you see even in your professional life?
My average day is 6 hours compared to 8 hours. And we've been tracking that for years because, well, I'm a nerd and I'm a scientist. So we track these things. My average day is 6 hours. That's 6 hours of sustained and focused work. And so rather than taking 8 hours to get work done, I can get it done in 6 hours, because the vast majority of people, if we can be all honest, it's now roughly 11:20, and most people have been at work for 3 hours. Let's be kind and say they've been at work for about 3 hours. 90 minutes of that has probably been productive, because they've had interruption after interruption, whether it's human interruption, people knocking on their door, coming to their cubicle, phone ringing, and so on. And that's just the natural cadence of work. But most of their distractions are self-inflicted, because they have this up, they have that up, they have this up. When I work with our clients, they know that they should, I always tell them, you should not be getting emails on demand. That's another tool I use. I don't get emails on demand. My emails come through once an hour, because if somebody is sending me something via email, it's not an emergency. If it's important, they're going to call me, right? If we're in the middle of war, the president is not sending an email to get things done. So, and that's serious business. But again, the challenge is that we think what we're doing and what's going on in our lives is so important. And I don't want to belittle us as humans, but we also have to make sure that we're in the right space, emotionally, spiritually, and otherwise, that we realize where we are. Having all these notifications turned on, are they adding value and moving you along the path to where you need to be? And I can venture to say 80% of them are not. And unfortunately, we keep adding those things because there's a sense it's making my day continue moving. It's making my day continue moving. But I never want to confuse activity with accomplishment, because way too many of us have a lot of activity, but very little accomplishment. So for me, it's trying to be efficient in the way I use my time. And part of that efficiency is making sure that I'm focused on whomever and whatever I'm doing at that moment. And everything else doesn't matter.
I love it. Well, before we move on to the next segment, Paul, what's your reaction to all that?
I love it. I want to talk about your video too.
Well, my video, speaking of, we're just having a conversation before we went live here about the weather, and we just talked about how Paul would be an amazing weatherman. And it has nothing to do with anything we're talking about. It's just, even when the weather would be lousy, Paul could make you feel good about it. I don't know why. It just has that presence. I digress. My video, I say it because it was horrible, hot, humid, gross, which I don't think comes across in the video. That's okay. The point of the video was this idea that Jesus is very clear. We get the 10 instructions, as it's meant to be understood, on what it looks like to live out the Christian life. And it goes from 10 to, by the time Jesus shows up with the law and the prophets and all of the additional writings and everything else of tradition and oral tradition, it's like 630. So we went from 10 to 630. People can't even hop on one leg after sun goes down on a Saturday. It's just nuts. They're miserable when Jesus shows up. And Jesus goes, I tell you what, we're going to go from 10 to 630. I'm going to reduce it down to 2, which is a lot easier to comprehend, infinitely harder to execute. Because he's like, enough with the outside, the way it looks. Let's dig down to your motivations and why you do it. So he goes, I tell you what, all the law and the prophets hang on this. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind. love your neighbor as yourself. There's the whole game, right? Well, the thing about Satan, and this was really what I was trying to get across, is that we always think that Satan is always about poltergeist and sure, scaring people to death and evil things that happen and horrible things that happen. Yes and amen. But we forget sometimes deception and evil. The end game is just to get your eyes off Jesus. However, that has to be done. And that can be done with a smile. That can be done when in gestures that seem courteous and nice, and they're not at all. It can just be deception. And so my point in the video is we've reached just in my analysis of the culture, we have managed to put Christians on their heels, and even probably well-meaning Christians don't realize the deception, and which is why I wanted to make the video, that we have flipped the 1 to the 2 and the 2 to the 1 without even realizing it. So all you have to do is love your neighbor as yourself and love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind. Make the 2 the 1 and the 1 the 2. And once you do that, if I first put my connection with Jesus first, it is through him that I get my marching orders as to what love looks like, because it's all in there. It's not when 2 people are committed. It's not. It's really clear in 1 Corinthians, right? It's also laying down your life. Like he goes through, what does love look like? What does marriage look like? How do you treat the people you hate? You know who that is out there, folks. They still got the Hillary sign up, right? Right? Oh, wait. They still got the Trump sign up. You can't stand them, right? And I know what culture says burn their little sign down, but actually says no. In fact, love your neighbor. And in fact, love your enemy, the people that hate you. And so my point really was culture, and I think this is Satan's deception too. Put the 2 first, and before you know it, if you make it all about the neighbor being the first and primary goal, before you know it, you're no longer worshiping the same one. In fact, the one that you're worshiping looks more like your culture, or the one that you're worshiping ends up looking more like your preferences, your bias, and what you already thought. And by the end, he has successfully moved you off of the one. And now it's some other thing, and I watched what's happening with culture. Man, it's just a strange thing. And Christians going, well, I'm supposed to love my neighbor. Yes, you are. Let's go back to who defined your neighbor. Let's go back to who defined love. Let's go back to all of that, So there it is. Machine gun style, as usual. What's your take, fellas?
You want to go first, Kozhi?
Sure. I couldn't agree with you more, which is kind of scary because
that's scary.
We should not be agreeing with each other this much. What's interesting is I was in Oklahoma this past weekend, working with a group of educators who've experienced a really difficult challenge, having to make decisions that other leaders should have been making. Right? These folks started off like anyone else. They wanted to be a teacher, so they became a teacher, and then they outgrew that, and then became an assistant principal, then a principal, then a superintendent, and they thought, rightly so, that their job was to take care of the kids in the community, was to help build the next generation by providing the basics for them, right? K through 12 is supposed to be giving you the very basics so that you can go on and do the wonderful things that you need to do, whether they're in the arts or whether they're in the sciences or whether they're in other specialties like woodworking and so on. But they were made to make these really hard decisions that pitted them against the community in brand new ways. And one of the things I talked to them about was the fact that culturally, it's very easy for people to focus on their preferences. There's a really good book by the late Dr. Edwin Lewis Cole. It's called Maximized Manhood. And one of the things he talks about in there is that there's only 2 kinds of men in this world. So I'll extend that to there's only 2 kinds of people in this world: people who live by preference and people who live by conviction. We live in a world right now that is filled with people who live by preference. Their convictions don't really drive anything. And unfortunately, it creates these unnecessary barriers between people, whether it's one political party over another, or it's inside the same political party, but you're across spectrum.
Yeah.
across the spectrum, whatever those reasons might be. And there's a rabid response to it. And part of the reason is because most of everything that we experience in life hits our emotional center first. And the vast majority of us are intellectually lazy and just lazy in general. So we won't do the hard work of transitioning whatever we felt and experienced from the emotional center to the prefrontal lobe so that we can actually think and actually use our brains. And so you've got a war going on outside, and then there's a war inside your mind as well. And so we have to make really hard decisions. And most of the times you have to get back to the basics, right? Love your neighbor as yourself. And then, of course, if you continue with that story as well, who is my neighbor?
Mm-hmm.
And it's just beautiful from there. And then he goes into the next parable. It's just, I wish I could speak like that man, but he just had a story for the next story for the next story. And you could see it all unfolding. But people either wanted to trap him because he was experiencing the same thing from a cultural perspective. And so he was trying to lay that foundation down. So when I think about your video and you having these very clear arguments, for lack of a better term, that we need to get back to those basics, right? If I love God, then it's easy for me to understand who my neighbor is. And then I can actually love my neighbor. That I don't have to like what they do sometimes, or like how they vote, or like how they speak, but I will love them. And part of that love is going to be respecting them. It's being honorable to them and being deferential to them. Rather than going into a situation where they have to be wrong and I have to be right, I will do the righteous thing. And so for me, those are the things that just jump out when I think about this topic and your video as well.
Right on.
Dr. Paul?
So yeah, once again, clobbered between the eyes by your video, Josh, because I love people. I love to serve and to add value and to make people happy, and I want them to like me. But it hit me so strongly that yeah, if there is a God, he has to have the first word and the last word. And that my ability to be really present with others depends on my being present to God from the heart of myself. And that's where, that challenge to love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. It's like I need all of me to be invested in this relationship so that I'm able to love myself and then give that love to other people as well. I think that I hope we're still on, Kozhi, because I don't see Josh.
You and me are still here, so we may have lost Josh.
But he says at the beginning of his video, he says, "Oh, here I am in a hole." And what I realized, figuratively, even though he's in this skate park, the hole that we can get in is that if our focus is on someone in my life, no matter how awesome they are, if my focus is on you, Kozhi, I can't go beyond what you bring to me. Jesus says a servant is no greater than the master, nor the one taught greater than the teacher. And so if you're my focus, then I'm in a hole. I can only get to where you are, which is maybe substantial from a human point of view, but it does not allow me to tap into the total expression of God in me as a person if I put God first. Josh says something in his video where he says, we will, if we're not careful, we'll end up with a different God. And I thought that was really so well said. In fact, you hear people talk about being codependent. And I've come to believe that the essence of codependency is what I like to call relational idolatry. I'm giving someone else the keys to my heart rather than God himself. And that's where I get into trouble. I still do with my wife, with my clients, with my family. I let people sometimes have such an access to my heart that it shifts me off of who I am in Christ and what my convictions are, what my values are, and what my priorities are. I surrender them sometimes to making other people happy. Unfortunately, Jesus says you cannot serve God and man. You cannot please both God and other people. And so I plead guilty to that. And wow, I don't know what's happening here, but it's but I do plead guilty to having those moments every day when I get focused on somebody else's agenda for me rather than what God has given me to do. And I want to shift that. I want to thank you, Josh, for the challenge.
Thank you so much. And I will tell you, of course, I had some internet issues just then. But knowing you two, whatever you both said, I am certain it was beautiful and profound and moving. So thank you anyway. Though I'm not sure 100% what you said.
You'll have to watch the replay, Josh.
We did say you had a check to send to us, so
okay,
you just agreed live. So
you guys are awesome. Hey, we want to thank Dr. Kozhi Mackay. Thank you so much, brother, for coming out. Special thanks to Woodlands Church, of course, Church of the King, Pilgrim Lutheran Church. I love you guys. I know you guys are checking us out today. Love you so much. Thank you for your support as well. Dr. Paul, you want to close in prayer?
Absolutely. God, you are first. You are the initiator of everything, the beginning and the end. You do have the final say. And we want to let you have that authority in our lives every day. God, thank you for the challenge to discipline that we got from Kozhi, the challenge to simplicity. Thank you for the challenge to keep you at the center of our focus, and from that focus to be able to then generate value in all of our relationships. God, I'm so grateful for these two men, and I just pray that you continue to bless them and expand their reach. God, I thank you for all of our listeners today, and I pray that each one of us would engage you in such a way that we understand that each of us is fearfully and wonderfully made, that we have the power to make a difference in every moment, in every interaction, by being fully present and fully invested in the love that you have for us and that the love that you have for us to give. So help us today. Make us more like Jesus. In his name we pray. Amen.
Amen. And we want to remind all you guys out there that the conversation that you just heard or took in live is also made available simply by searching The Westcliffe Climb on all major podcast platforms. We love you guys. We will see you next week. Bye.